All right, welcome to the Zenspath 4-Button Podcast Extra Quarter, episode 25. I'm your host, Jeremy Powers, and joining me for this, very legally episode, we have our one lawyer, Stephen,
No Sharpies.
and then our redacted for security reasons other host and judge, Chris.
Hello.
Thankfully, we didn't use Sharpie, so you still can't see his face. That joke will come into play later. So yeah, this extra quarter, we were going to make it an episode, but we're pretty much only talking about the FTC versus Microsoft case today. And that's all we're talking about because, good Lord, this got juicy and messed up. I could almost say it's more Microsoft v FTC via Sony or Sony via FTC. I don't know. But
Special guest Sony via Zoom.
Basically. So we're going to break this down. There was 5 days of this court case. So we're going to go through each day, covering a couple of the things. There's going to be a lot of quotes, so expect me to read a lot. I apologize. But I even had to go back on, we are, at 12 pages of notes typed up on a Google Doc. And I was nice enough to at least try and make all the quotes blue so you have all the little spots so we can see them. But I want to give a special thanks to everybody over at The Verge, over at IGN, and the dad guy over in our Discord, because they have been, keeping everybody up to date on this as it happens, supplying all the information that I did use to make these notes and kept up with everything while I was at work. So great job from them. And then the dad guy was sending us stuff and sharing things on our Discord about it as well. So greatly appreciate that too. So let us get started. Day one started right off the bat with a email that Microsoft showed off that they had gotten from Sony. This is an email from Sony's chief, Jim Ryan, that was dropped by Microsoft lawyer Beth Wilkinson that said, quote, "It is not an exclusivity play at all. They're thinking bigger than that, and they have the cash to make moves like this. We have some good stuff cooking. I'm not complacent, and I'd rather this hadn't happened, but we'll be okay. We'll be more than okay." And then he also stated, quote, "Pretty sure we will continue to see Call of Duty on PlayStation for many years to come." Now, this whole lawsuit, or the whole thing brought up by the FTC, is in regards to Microsoft making the purchase of Activision Blizzard to merge in with their game studios, just like they did the past couple of years with ZeniMax Studios and Bethesda. Now, Call of Duty has been a huge complaint, or at least part of that, through Sony, who was one of the parties that has been complaining to the FTC as well as the UK's CMA, and has been kind of pushing and causing the delays in this for, good Lord, like a year and a half now. It's been going on forever. So this immediately kind of puts a clip in the wings on the FTC's argument that Sony would be hurt by this, which I still find weird. Like, do you guys find it odd that the FTC seems to be like protecting Sony, the market leader in this right now for this whole case? Steven?
Yeah, it's almost like they would be stepping on too many toes if they went against the mighty Sony and their movies, music, game division. So they feel if they poke the bear, like, we don't want to bother him.
Yeah, I don't know. But I mean, that's, I think, is a pretty strong start to that whole argument of going on. But this also happened a few days before Sony announced their purchase of Bungie. So this was going on at the same time that Sony was making moves to bring in other companies. And we'll make it clear, Activision Blizzard is by far larger than Bungie. Like, that is not even comparable. But it's still the acquisition of another company and bringing them in. So the biggest argument here is the FTC thinks this is a monopoly, that this will be unfair advantage for Microsoft, that they will be this massive power in the United States, and that Sony can't compete and keep up with them with what they have. And then the very weird ones with Nintendo, that they're not even a game company. We'll get into that. Wow, that was weird. So the first person they called up was Microsoft's Xbox Game Studios head, Matt Booty. which I'm sure the jokes have been made, but I apologize for that man having to grow up with that name. It's either pirate jokes or other things all day long.
They called up Booty to talk about Call of Duty.
A veritable booty call.
I was going to do a Sea of Thieves joke, but Chris just put me to shame. I'm going to let that one go.
If you're listening along with us, or you're following the case, take a drink every time they say Call of Duty.
Don't. I do not want to be responsible for
Going
that
to
many
kill
deaths.
people.
You can pretend to take a drink and still not be able to pass a breathalyzer. Oh, good God. So they called him up there, and immediately they started on one of the FTC's main arguments. And that is they were asking, how would Call of Duty run on the Switch? So Booty responded that Microsoft, quote, would have to just adjust graphics and assets to run on Nintendo's platforms, with the FTC then arguing that means the game would be separate and dissimilar from the Xbox and PlayStation console versions. Yeah, shock and awe. Anyone that's played a Switch game knows they tend to be different. They can run a lot of the same games. We got, what was there? Witcher 3 is the one that a lot of people go to. We had
Ark Survival.
Yeah, and that one actually got an update that made it even better running on there. And there's
Outer
a whole bunch of
Wilds.
different ones. What's the space one?
There's Outer Wilds as well.
Outer Wilds does run horribly.
No Man's Sky.
No Man's Sky. That one is, that's another one of the impressive
Mortal Kombat
ones.
11. All big guys.
Mortal Kombat 1 is coming to the Switch still. So they keep pushing that because if they can take Nintendo out of the running and say that they're not considered competition to Xbox or PlayStation, then all of their numbers show Xbox being the number 2 console because there would only be 2 left. So, of course, they're going to be second place instead of third, which they are very much third in the way these sales are going. So, I don't know. It's very strange. Let me see here. So the FTC kind of went on and talked about previous statements that Booty had made in emails about creating, quote, a moat that nobody else can attack back in 2021. And he said, we are not putting our first party IP on competing streaming or subscription services. No effing way, which it was confirmed. He actually did say no effing way. And then that was in regards to putting NVIDIA putting Xbox PC games on their GeForce Now streaming service without Microsoft's permission, which they've recently made an agreement with NVIDIA. And this is going to be jumping around a lot. They go from Nintendo to NVIDIA to all this other stuff. So excuse the kind of jumping around this is going to cause. Let's see here. They went on to talk about pulling all of Bethesda's games as well once they acquired them so as not to compete with their own xCloud service. He has backed off the idea now, but he was saying, I think since then we've seen that while content is absolutely important to our strategy, it really isn't a durable advantage that covers the... I think I mistyped that. Those that can enter a field and build a content library relatively quickly. So I guess they're just talking about they've kind of changed their mindset on that, and they're making deals with different companies to be able to use their streaming platforms.
Yeah,
so
that was the email. He said the line a lot of people are bringing up too, that we could outspend Sony into bankruptcy. Like we could put them out of business, so to speak, and talked about a lot of interesting things, talking about how Google won't try to do the gaming scene. In the last few years, they did. How Amazon doesn't have a gaming presence. They kind of do a little bit now.
Luma, I think.
Because Amazon Games is now a label on a lot of trailers I've seen.
Mm-hmm.
So, like he said as well, that happened years ago, over 29 months ago, and strategies have changed, and this was all speaking about if they could actually get a company such as Bethesda, what could they do with it?
Right. Okay. Chris, any thoughts on this so far? Are you just along for the ride?
Well, as mentioned before, um, it's all very. Not only is the information from a couple of years ago,
Mm-hmm.
it might just be overblown because this is an email from one company, an in company email.
Right.
So it might just be trying to skew towards, you know, getting a certain decision made. You know what I mean?
Right.
So this kind of thing still needs to be taken with a grain of salt, though it definitely sheds a light on what Microsoft was thinking at the time.
I agree. It kind of puts a little bit, like you said, a light on that, but they've also kind of made decisions outside of that that kind of contradict it, which means it does kind of look like, hey, we've moved away from that original mindset.
Yeah, and it still seems like it's one person's pipe dream of this is how things could go, and we want to be the Disney of games when
Mm-hmm.
we already have a Disney of games. It's called Nintendo. Um, so it was a lot of stuff where he's just like, can you imagine we get this and this is what we can do with it?
I don't think there is a Disney of games, honestly, because with movies, you've got several IPs that will never really be on another, you know, it's out of other companies' reach, There's never going to be a Marvel movie made by the DC guys or by Warner Brothers, you
Right.
know. So, at least with some properties aside from first property games like Mario and Zelda, there can be cooperation with other companies.
Well, I say the Disney of games is because they have a games department. They have a movie division now. Their movie has beaten all the Disney movies, and they have a theme park. So if anybody's close to the moniker Disney of games, it's Nintendo.
Perhaps. I guess it depends on how you define it, but again, it's interesting to see all this happening.
Yeah, I think all that comes down to license deals, and I've kind of learned like never say it'll never happen
There
because
is that.
we had back in
I,
the day we had DC and Marvel publishing the amalgam comics together, doing crossovers and things like that. Like these things can happen sometimes if the right paperwork and
Yeah,
the right amount of money is thrown at it.
and if we're even talking about FTC, they didn't bat an eye or really push too hard when Disney's like, we're going to buy Star Wars and Marvel.
And then Fox, all of Fox.
Oh, yeah, and Fox. And they were like, okay.
Yeah, they had some
just
complaints,
makes
but
everything going even weirder.
Like I said, FTC poking the bear. They were like, we don't want to mess with Disney either. Nope.
mm. So next up, they called Bethesda head of global publishing Pete Hines, and he actually had stated previously an apology to PlayStation players about no longer getting Starfield. He said, "quote It bothered me that they were upset. I don't like it when our players are upset over something we do." Which they were talking about the fact that some of the Bethesda games would be normally available for everybody depending on what you were playing on, and kind of going from there. The FTC argued that Microsoft would make Activision Blizzard games exclusive like some Bethesda titles and won't handle any of it like they did Minecraft when they bought Mojang, which that's also a big kind of like flag in the room going like, hey, we look how we've handled Minecraft, because that has turned out like evidence later. They make way more money with how it runs on other systems. Xbox is actually the smallest market. Like PC obviously is the largest of all of them, but whatever they make on Xbox with Minecraft, they make twice as much of that on PlayStation, and then twice that, which is 4 times what Microsoft makes on the Xbox, just on the Switch. Which once again screams, that's competition, guys. that is a competing system. Just because its specs aren't as good, it's like arguing the Game Boy wouldn't count because there was the links on the Game Gear. And look how that turned out. That demolished everything else. Microsoft retorted that if they hadn't made Starfield exclusive, it wouldn't be coming out this year. They were, saying that because they dropped development down to one system instead of two, they can streamline a lot of that and kind of focus and get things working as need be. So we're getting it in about 9 weeks, I think, from this point, versus probably another couple of years. So We shall see. Heinz did let slip, and this was kind of funny. It was brought up about the Indiana Jones game that was coming out. They did let slip that this will be exclusive now to Xbox and PC. So that's a bit of a difference. Now, it was originally agreed with Disney and Bethesda before the merger that the game would be multi-platform, but once the merger went through, Bethesda renegotiated with Disney and they reached an agreement to make it Xbox and PC exclusive. So I know some people are arguing saying, hey, it was on PlayStation and they pulled it. Disney did agree to whatever arrangements they made. So that's kind of Disney's decision. If they had really said, no, it needs to go everywhere else, I'm sure the money was there. I'm sure Microsoft opened up some checkbooks on that one.
If I know how they negotiate with these bigger companies with licenses, I'm thinking Microsoft probably said something along the lines of, when Dial of Destiny comes to home video and streaming, we could have the game ready around that time. The movie just came out today, so give it a while, obviously.
Yeah.
But with that slip, who knows? We could suddenly have an announcement that the Indiana Jones game is ready to be released right around that time, and that gave Disney, shades of green.
True. But that move and the decision for Redfall and Starfield to be exclusives, they said, are about reducing risk and trying to get a degree of certainty, which I guess they're trying to do for development, which bringing up Redfall is probably not a good idea on that one. That game was bad. So bad. I kind of hope they fix it, but I'm not getting it for a while. So that pretty much finished up with Pete Hines for the moment. After this, we moved on to Xbox head of creator experience, Sarah Bond, which she has shown up in a lot of their, I want to say directs, but they're not actually directs. But she's been around for a little while. I think she's been with the company since, I believe, 2017. So she's actually been there about as long as my current job is, too. She spent a lot of her time talking to the judge and trying to explain things in a way that somebody who is not so much a gamer or following a lot of this stuff normally would better understand, which I think is a good move on Microsoft's part to put her up on the stand for that. But because she went through and explained Xbox Game Pass, the cloud gaming system, and how Microsoft subscriptions generates Xbox players to buy more games in the genres they don't normally play when they're trying out stuff. Bond revealed that Microsoft was forced to agree to a new revenue sharing deal with Activision, which this I thought was interesting. So in order to get Call of Duty on the Xbox Series X and S, when it was during its launch period, Activision, pretty much to put it bluntly, had Microsoft by the balls. Because they were already working on a PlayStation 5 particular version and told them, if you don't change how much money we get from this, we will not give you a Series X and S version of Call of Duty. You'll only get an Xbox One version. Which, how bad that would have looked for Sony to have a PS4 and PS5 edition and Microsoft to go, well, ours is backwards compatible. Like that would have been horrible, for their marketing and stuff. Normally Microsoft has a 70-30 split, 70 for the publisher, 30 for Microsoft. But the FTC lawyer let slip, because apparently this wasn't supposed to come out, that it was going to become an 80-20 deal where 80% of the money would go to Activision and only 20% of it would go to Microsoft. And then later on, they're finding from some of the leaked documents that Sony dropped, which we'll talk about too, they may have only been paying 10%. Or actually, I'm sorry, being able to keep more, like they were keeping more of the money is what it was. So it was kind of a different deal on that. So it just seems like Activision was kind of screwing Microsoft just to try and bleed a little bit of money out of them, or maybe make up for what they were losing from their Sony side of the deal. I don't know. They said Bond stated they could vary from that 70-30 split if it was, quote, where we believed it was critical to get that content. And I do think, whether you like Call of Duty or not, that's a big enough title that if they had not gotten it secured for Series X and S, it would have been a huge nail in their foot as soon as they started off. And that was already a rough time with, hardware shortages and stuff as well. Um, let's see. Do you guys have any thought on that Activision fiasco that popped up there?
I don't know if it was mentioned later. I think it was,
Mhm.
but I thought it was kind of a negative on Sony, stating that the deals they made with Call of Duty and the fact that they're about to have Call of Duty Cold War on PlayStation Plus next month, and Xbox supposedly, from what I heard as well, has it where they cannot have it on Game Pass until 2025. Any
Yep.
Call of Duty games.
Yeah, so they've made a lot of deals that have kind of excluded out Microsoft from these things, and you can tell it's like, hey, you're not the market leader, so we're going to kind of kick you while you're down. Like, you have to play our ball the way we want it to with our rules, or else you're not going to get it. So, Bond went and testified that Microsoft was losing money on running xCloud servers currently, and it's more of a feature, not a service, with most usage being on console as a means for players to try out games, which kind of makes sense. People can just hop into a game, try it out for a little bit, where they're not too worried about, like, how is it going to stream? We just want to get a feeling for how it looks and how it runs. And if we like it, we'll either download it from Game Pass or go and purchase it even, um, which seems to be the majority of use for it right now. And I think that's most of what I've seen. Have you guys ever tried any of the Game Pass Ultimate or any of that stuff for the streaming yet?
I think I tried it once
Mm-hmm.
just to get like the proof of concept, and much like any streaming, especially when PlayStation had PlayStation Now, it's finicky, and it is nowhere near where the FTC or the CMA said it was at, where it was the pinnacle of cloud gaming brought to you by Microsoft. And I said, I don't know where you're going with this, but cloud is doing great for anything that's not gaming, but it is a new venture for gaming, and it is slowly building, but it's not going to be stable anytime soon.
Cloud gaming will never be stable unless every player everywhere has the same broadband and bitrate and everything. Otherwise, I actually did try Amazon Luna for a while, and
Mm-hmm.
even the simplest games I would have skips and interruptions with.
Yeah, I did too. I played it with coworkers and shared my screen, and something as simple as Jackbox even couldn't handle it.
Mm. I mean, I've
So
talked about it on
cloud
the
gaming is. Oh, continue.
I was gonna say I've talked about it on the show before, but I originally tried out Stadia when that came out. I had gotten it from Google. Their best package that had it had the 4K connector that you could plug in an Ethernet. It could do wireless, had the controller, everything. And I tried it in the best case scenario and worst case scenario. So I had it hooked up where it had, all of the physical connection. It was running in 4K and everything, and it was just laggy, and like you said, there'd be drops and things going on. I tried running it at the 1080p at the lower resolution, wireless and everything, and I was still having problems. And I tried different games. Like, I tried messing with Destiny on it. I tried playing, there was like a sniper game. I tried a platformer. Like, everything was a mess. And I'm like, it was neat, but it was not how I wanted to play games. I was like, I would not keep doing this if this was my only option.
Yeah, and just the fact that you would stream it, in Stadia's case, you would buy the full game,
oh yeah.
but then if the company went away, you lose all those games. That's why streaming is not yet good enough unless it's a monthly fee.
Yeah, and with Stadia,
And
there was still
it's
a monthly
stable.
fee.
And it's stable. Yeah.
Yeah, Stadia was the worst case of all of them. They had a monthly fee that you could pay to get the better bit rates and stuff, and you had to buy the games, and it still didn't work right.
And then they tried to do the Game Pass. So here's some games every month.
Yeah, they finally gave up on that one. So I'm sure streaming eventually will be good for certain things. Like if you're playing RPGs or stuff that's like turn-based, probably fine. Most people wouldn't even notice. You could pull it up on your laptop wherever you're at and have a little fun with it. But people thinking you're going to be playing Street Fighter or, first-person shooters and stuff like that, it's a pipe dream right now. It's just not happening. Because people at events where they can set up their own internet how they want it are still having problems with it. And if they're making their perfect scenario, sessions to show it off and can't do it right, the hell is everybody else going to do? So, all right. Well, that ends day 1, and now we're moving on to day 2 of 5. That's not too bad. 25 minutes to get through all that. This one started off with Senior Finance Director of Xbox, Jamie Lauver. I apologize if I can't say his name right. They couldn't release any audio because they had a problem where people were streaming it and then trying to stream that because they only allowed for 1,000 people to watch it on Zoom. And I was at work. I wasn't even going to try. So we'll go from there. But we don't know what he said because his entire thing was a sealed witness testimony. And we had that happen a few times. So that didn't manage to come out. But the guy that was next is the one that I think a lot of people were curious to see. And that's Xbox chief, Phil Spencer. And the FTC really tried to grill him on stuff. I think he pushed back pretty well on it. But I know some of this got to the point the judge had to intercede to make the FTC lawyers stop. So immediately they went into the argument again that Nintendo is not a competitor to Xbox or PlayStation, because that is one of the biggest cruxes of their argument. If they can disprove that, it skews the numbers in their favor. They went so far as to bring in a Series X, a PS5, and a Switch to physically look at them and be like, see, they can't be competitors. They're not the same size. Phil stated, quote, the PS5 and Xbox Series X shipped at the same time. From a form factor, these two functionally look more equivalent. It's incorrect to say Nintendo isn't a competitor. The Switch was designed for people to take on the go. Whereas the
Look
Gen
how
8...
dinky this thing is. Look how small and dinky this thing is. It's pathetic.
Right? Whereas the Gen 8 Xbox One consoles require that they're plugged into the wall and don't have a screen. Nintendo built a different platform. So that's not saying it's, not competition or viable. It's just a different thing. Just like the Xbox One had the Kinect built into it, or the PS3 just had a chip that nobody could understand. It's a feature, not a bug. So they kind of hammer that. And a funny little anecdote I looked into about this during the Epic v Apple lawsuit. You guys remember that from last year?
Oh, yeah.
Sure.
That verdict, it was decided that the Switch was potentially a future competitor to Apple and Google phones, but they weren't one yet. But now 2 years later, in this case, and they can't decide if the Switch is even a console or not. It's like, you guys really need to make up your mind. The FTC even spun into asking questions trying to get the FPS ratings for all of the systems, including the Switch, and then going into the GPU and teraflops, trying to get raw numbers. And it is the most
judge.
Yeah, it's the most I've ever heard of a government official go straight up gamer fanboy. Like, it's almost the, PC master race going like, well, this isn't going to run as good as my 4090 or like, man, they are really, really into that. So what do you guys think about this whole argument of trying to make Nintendo illegitimate? Steve?
It's a shot in the dark. It's the FTC saying, well, what do we have? Well, we have numbers, so let's try to say this is smaller, therefore not as powerful. This has less FPS, and the teraflops are lower. This is not even what the argument is even about, and they're trying to spin it into an episode of what do you call it? Digital Foundry, where they're trying to compare them all.
God, even Digital Foundry would give Switch some credit. Come on. Chris, you got any thoughts?
They'd call them a console.
That's another thing. This all feels like some kind of weird dredging up, and the fact that the words console wars were used in this day and age when exclusivity isn't even that big a deal anymore. It feels like these companies are really just trying to dredge up the old schoolyard attempts at game comparison. Next time, if they bring up the Jaguar, I'm going to laugh. Think of how many bits that had.
Do the math.
64.
Yeah,
Exactly.
do the math, man. Like, the three of us are almost the same age. We all grew up during what I refer to as the true console wars of Sega versus Super Nintendo. You know, that was a console war. That got heated.
Yeah, and these days, everything is just so melded together. And I think companies fear that because if you have 3 of the exact same game on one system running the exact same way, then it's not a question of power anymore. It's a question of just who wants to play what on where. And the Switch is the most accessible of all the consoles.
Yeah.
So that's a disturbing thought for them. So they
called it a
that's
console twice.
exactly I did. How dare I? So I think personally that's one reason they don't want it to be viable,
Mm-hmm.
because it offers more when you don't think of raw computational power.
Agreed. Let's see here. You might hear in the background my car keeps saying charging stopped, charging started. That's because it's right outside the wall. It's really hot outside and I'm trying to charge it, so it keeps stopping and waiting. And I keep forgetting it's going to talk when it does that. So if you hear it, my bad. I have to use my car tomorrow, so I want it charged.
The only thing I've heard so far is the Sega title screen.
If I can make it do that, that'd be actually kind of funny.
I was trying to turn something off on my end.
Oh, that's fine. I didn't even hear that part.
I heard it and I tried not to laugh in the beginning.
So Phil was asked if Microsoft had lost the console wars, as you said, which, yes, we now have a federal case that talks about console wars. What a time we live in. But he stated, quote, "As the console wars is a social construct with the community, I would never want to count our community out. They're big fans. If you look at our market share in the console space over the last 20 plus years, we're in third place. We're behind Sony and Nintendo in console share globally." Which they are. Like, you know, the Xbox has got its foot somewhere in the United States. They're still probably third place, but they're doing a little bit better. But globally, Xbox has really had trouble branching out. Like Japan, they just don't want to touch it. They don't care. Europe's done a little bit better, but not much. Other countries from beyond that, I don't know the exact numbers on it. Now, they do go into the fact Phil talks about Sony's aggressive and hostile competition practices and that Xbox is a distant third in the market. FTC asked about an email where Phil states that PlayStation is hostile to Xbox's survival. He responded back, "Every time we ship a game on PlayStation, Sony captures 30% of the revenue that we do on their platform, and then they use that money among other revenue that they have to do things to try to reduce Xbox's survival on the market. We try to compete, but as I said, over the last 20 years, we failed to do that effectively." Sounds a little defeatist, but I kind of get it. Like, Sony keeps taking this money that they're getting, turning around and making third-party deals and so forth, where it's removing games from them to be able to acquire. And then they had talked about certain games on there being exclusive or not, but one they asked about specifically was Elder Scrolls 6. Because he came out and said, "I think we've been a little unclear on what platform it's launching on. Given how far out the game is, it's difficult for us right now to nail down." I get that Phil doesn't want to confirm or deny, but I thought they had already confirmed this. I had to go back, and I guess I just misread whatever their quote was. Um, but did you guys think at all that that was already announced as an exclusive? Was it just me?
As far as I know, um, when Todd was up in the last Bethesda presentation, uh, I think he said that one was for, because of how far along it was for multiple systems.
That and a lot of game festivals and things are very vague about things where they
Mm-hmm.
say worldwide premiere and currently exclusive. That doesn't mean it's going to be exclusive that way forever. They're just
Right.
saying when it comes out on day one, it's only going to be on this console. So again, uh, all the companies are usually, guilty of this, where they'll just say, "Oh, we've only got it now," and they're not going to say, "Well, these other companies are going to get it later." So you better get it now for us.
Yeah, I've seen that for pretty much all three of the. And I'm going to keep referring to them as directs because it's the easier way for me to do it. But each company's direct, they'll only show a trailer that shows their stuff, and then you have to look and find it separate from the actual company to see if that will show any other system or place that it's going.
Yeah, they'll edit it out of the trailer.
Yeah, they'll make their own marketing version, and then Sony will release that trailer that only says PlayStation, but then the company will release one that says all of them or something.
Exactly. You always have to look elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I get it. You don't want to shill for the other company, but there's still a matter of, I don't know, chivalry, I guess. I don't know how I would want to put it. I guess I would say
Transparency?
transparency, dignity, that kind of thing. You
There's
know,
only war.
yeah, clearly,
Console war.
exactly. It's bad when you have to look on not only just the company's website but the game designer's website to see like, okay, Mortal Kombat 1 looks only to be on Epic Games or whatever. It's like, oh, okay, it's on Steam. It just they seem to have whited it out on the you know on the page.
Yeah, seriously. Phil went on to continue, though, that some titles like Minecraft Legends were talked about to be exclusive, which obviously didn't happen since you can get that on Switch and PlayStation and everything else now. But I don't think that's out of place. Like for them just to have discussions of certain games are going to be exclusive, I think are appropriate. Nintendo has them. I guarantee Sony has them because they have a lot of exclusives. But it almost feels like they're trying to make it like, oh, you're talking about exclusives. That's bad. You're trying to pull things from people instead of, hey, you're strengthening your own market or giving us more reasons to get this particular hardware, you know? So, excuse me. When asked why Microsoft needed to own Bethesda to compete, Phil actually responded, quote, when we acquired ZeniMax, one of the impetus for that is that Sony had done a deal for Deathloop and Ghostwire to pay Bethesda to not ship those games on Xbox. So the discussion about Starfield, when we heard that Starfield was potentially also going to end up skipping Xbox, we can't be in the position as a third place console where we fall further behind on our content ownership. So we had to secure content to remain viable in the business. So pretty much they were like, crap, now we're hearing Starfield's going to skip us because Sony was making moves to try and pay that off, just like they've done for Final Fantasy 16, Final Fantasy 7, remake, and a number of other titles that'll even come to the Switch but won't come to Xbox. And I'm sure we've noticed that on a few things before that you're like, this should be on Xbox. Why is it not? Like, what happened with Shenmue 3? That never showed up on Xbox. Only 1 and 2. So, but exclusives, as he says, are an established part of the console business, and Sony and Nintendo are very strong with their exclusive games. And I'm guessing the two of you probably agree with that, right? Steven?
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. Especially since Sony and Nintendo have had a longer time to build these exclusives.
Mm-hmm.
While when Xbox finally came out, they had a few, but only a few actually like took and carried on into the next iteration. while other ones that were exclusive to them, because I remember the little yellow
Blinks the
rectangle
cat,
on my
you're gone
box
too
saying
soon.
only on Xbox, those went the way of the dodos. So
We all just miss
that
Blinks.
started the whole Microsoft. We need to catch up when then they bought Rare.
Chris, what are your thoughts on it?
That's an interesting way of putting it. And again, this all feels like it's just trying to go back to video gaming's heyday.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the I think the strongest exclusives tend to be first party developed titles. And otherwise, there shouldn't be a wall between things like this. Like, unfortunately, Xbox and Microsoft have been really lagging in their first party development, and I think that's why they're trying so hard to acquire Activision Blizzard. We know what first party exclusive Nintendo has. They've built their company around them, and I would argue that they have the strongest first party properties in
Oh, for
all of
sure.
gaming.
100% I
You
agree
know,
with that.
and Sony's got them too, but they're a little less known, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
And Microsoft used to have them, but those properties aren't nearly as strong as they used to be. Um, you know, when are we going to get the Master Chief Land at Universal Studios, Chief World?
Halo Wonder. Just
Yeah,
surprise
the
release.
Halo roller coaster.
Blink's coaster ride.
There you go. Oh, Blinks. Ugh.
See, and the funny thing is, like, people talking about, first party developers should make the games, but it's not uncommon, and it's been going for a really long time, where a company will buy out another one to take their game, make it exclusive as a first party release. Because that's what Halo was. It was originally a Macintosh exclusive game until Microsoft purchased Bungie and made it an Xbox exclusive, and it became the flagship that sold that system. It's why I bought my Xbox, was because of the original Halo when I got to play it. So that worked in that
Exclusives
regard.
work.
And I've had Xbox ever since. And I'm curious if you guys agree. I'm going to make the statement and then ask you guys. As much as I keep hearing people claim that one game is never going to sell a system, in my eyes, one game always sells a system. There's always one game you see that finally clicks that switch where you're going, I need this system. I want that game. The other stuff may be bonus, but this is why I want it. And I can go back to any system and pick out that game and tell you which one it was.
Yeah,
So,
one game makes the decision, basically.
Correct.
So if we look at the last sales in Japan, let's just take Japan for example.
Mm-hmm.
PS5 sold about 58,000 units. Switch sold 102,000 on a 6-year-old iPad system. Do you think it was because of one game? Because I think so.
Obviously, the 1-2 Switch sequel. I mean,
I think there's some tears to be shed for the amount they sold because they didn't really report that they were hitting those numbers before, and then we got a surge. So I think a certain one game came out, and that sold systems. People who waited knew what they wanted to get, and they said, as soon as this comes out, I'm getting a Switch. That's why they have bundles. That's why bundles exist. Bundles are literally telling you that one game can sell you the system because you want that game so bad, you'll buy a system to play it. God of
which
War
kills me
Ragnarok.
because Nintendo didn't even sell Tears of the Kingdom with the bundle.
They just remind you that the games. They just remind you that the game's in the ether there, like ready for you. Hey, here's a Zelda system. By the way, there's Zelda over there. If you want to go meet her, so, all right.
I fell for it. I bought the OLED Zelda Switch. I bought the game, the collector's edition. I bought the amiibo. I bought.
So people who say one game can't sell a system don't know what bundles are.
Yeah, pretty much that's how that goes. Because even back with the GameCube, I really liked Luigi's Mansion, but Rogue Leader sold me on a GameCube. As soon as I saw that, I was like, holy crap, I'm in. I want that.
Yeah,
And
for
it's
me, it
still
was
one of my
Metroid
favorite
Prime.
ones. Say what?
For me, it was Metroid Prime.
That's a good one. That one was a little bit
let's
after
go to
launch.
that. Let's
Huh?
go to that. The one game sells a system. There was a Metroid Prime GameCube. There was a Pokemon XD GameCube. It was a Smash Brothers GameCube, and all it was a little tiny bit of plastic on your disc cover that you opened and closed. You did not get the game inside, but again, Nintendo reminded you you're going to buy that one game, that this system, because of that one game, and it's
I
going to be
forgot
one of
about
those
those.
three.
Yeah. I think that would be a good big question for us to have sometime, to go through the systems and decide and say what our favorite game was. So we'll have to make a note of that. But moving on with the actual court case, um, he, Phil Spencer also revealed that Microsoft looked at buying Zynga, but it was acquired by Take-Two Interactive first. After that, they decided to go after something bigger to get a better foothold in the mobile space, because that's the other goal that Microsoft has here. They're not trying to get Call of Duty. That would be nice as a moneymaker, but they want that foothold of a company that has a better cellular or mobile market that they can get into, because Microsoft's tried for years for mobile gaming. I had multiples of the Windows phones. I will argue to this day they're still some of my favorites, and I miss them. Had a better interface than most phones. And I had a couple of the games on there that I could play. But they've never really gotten good about making more mobile games. Like, why the hell do we not have a Viva Pinata on a phone? Come on, that just sells itself as growing a farm or whatever and having pinatas you can walk around with. But what got interesting here is there was a very heated exchange between the FTC and Phil with questions about Call of Duty coming to PlayStation. So Phil stated, quote, "I would raise my hand. I would do whatever it takes. My commitment is, and my testimony is, that we will continue to ship future versions of Call of Duty on Sony's PlayStation 5. The key here being, he specifically said PlayStation 5.
Not 4, not 6.
So the FTC pushed back about this, saying, would all versions of a PlayStation get this deal for the next 10 years? Which Phil did clarify. He said, that's my goal. Yes. FTC then tried to push for an agreement to make all Activision games available to PlayStation without limitations, where Phil pushed back as he was specifically asked about Call of Duty and pointed out mobile games, World of Warcraft and such wouldn't work for that deal. So he couldn't make a blanket promise. So the FTC continued to push. They tried to say, would all future PlayStations get Diablo? And you can see they're changing their wording where they're saying all future or any existing. Phil said yes, but the FTC pushed more and wanted him to bind the corporation to this forever agreement. Phil actually refused to answer. He said nothing, because that's pushing it. That's asking too much. The FTC then stopped and said their point was being made. Do you see that as fair during a court case like this, to try and make a company agree, almost by force, it feels like, to forever put these games on a competitor's system without any chance or distinction on the change?
That doesn't sound like something that should be decided in a courtroom. That sounds like a contract that should be done in a meeting between two companies.
Which I will
say, and
say,
then the FTC changing their wording each time too.
Yeah. Microsoft has a standing contract with Sony right now stating we will unequivocally give you every Call of Duty that's made for at least the next 10 years, next decade. That's a generation and a half probably by this point. And Sony refuses to sign it. Nintendo signed it. Other companies have signed it and made that agreement, but Sony refuses, because they're part of what's pushing all of this, trying to get this deal blocked. So after this, the FTC tried making commitments to bring Call of Duty to any cloud service that PlayStation makes. and at this point, the judge actually stepped in and said that we're done. They cut off the question. So even the judge was getting tired of where this was going and like, what the hell?
Yeah, this is, again, as I mentioned before, these are not decisions that should be made without a legal and binding contract written out. This isn't just something, oh, now that you just said this, well, we want this too.
Right. Like, how would that
that
contract hold up if they're like, well, we heard it in the court case? Well, you was also under duress being pressed by a lawyer in front of people. When you make legal agreements, you're not pressured like that. You get your lawyers, they get together, you let the lawyers hash it out, and then you look and see if you agree with it or not, and you go back and forth. There's always a give and take. But just making him say it on the stand just feels very weird that the Federal Trade Commission's pushing for that on PlayStation's behalf. He's not saying, will it come to everybody? It's like, will it go to PlayStation, to Sony stuff? And it did come out. Some of the FTC lawyers were previous Sony lawyers.
Oh, nice.
Not all of them, like not directly for everything, but enough to go like, maybe you should recuse yourself, So we'll have to see. This next part I actually found very interesting because I've said it before and I've talked to you guys as well. I play a lot of Minecraft. I love that game. And I've always wondered, why has Microsoft never updated the damn thing? And we actually have an answer now. So when asked why Minecraft still doesn't have a PlayStation 5 particular edition, Phil stated, quote, Sony was reluctant to ship us PlayStation dev kits. It put us behind on our development for Minecraft on PS5. The FTC then lawyer came back and said this was an act of retaliation against Sony. So Phil responded again, there is a version of Minecraft that runs on PS5, but this isn't an optimized version. It's simply the PS4 version of the game. Then again, there still isn't an Xbox Series X or S optimized version of Minecraft. So is Microsoft fighting back against its own platform too? Which I think that's a pretty good retort. And I think what's happening is they want to make the better versions. They've shown like ray tracing and stuff like that. And I'm always going to bring up ray tracing with this. Running on a Series X, it was a test version, but they were working on it. I don't think they've released the Series X and S versions because they can't develop the PS5 version correctly. And they're trying to keep them all compatible with each other. So until they can finish the PS5 version, I don't think we're going to see a Series X and S version. They're having to hamper themselves to look and maintain a level playing field. And that's not, and they're trying to make it out that Microsoft's retaliating, but it's Sony shooting itself in the foot, not giving them the tools they need to actually make the game for their platform.
Yeah, and that's clearly impeding Microsoft as well.
Mm-hmm.
So,
because Microsoft very easily could have been like, well, we went ahead and made our version. We couldn't do yours because you wouldn't let us. Tough luck. And I guarantee if they had done that, that would have been brought up during this court case where they would have said, hey, how come you haven't given us the PlayStation version, but you do have your Xbox version? Like, you made that one better. So, I mean, they've even kept the Switch version as compatible as it can be. Like, you can play on that just fine. Obviously, that version's never going to get ray tracing. Your system would catch on fire. But it's still compatible to play in that world. It would just not have that texture pack. So I'm hoping one day we finally get that version. I'm tired of waiting. But that was the end of everything with Phil Spencer. So they finally got him off the stand. And we moved on to Google's former Stadia product lead, Dov Zimring, who was called up. And he just kind of went through a few things real quick. They revealed that Stadia failed because they didn't have enough games and the interest wasn't there. Dov didn't work right. That's why it died. That and Google likes to just kill everything early. So they had experimented with running Stadia on Windows servers, but decided the cost was too much. Because for what their cost was, they were only getting levels of like PS4 and Xbox One graphically. they wanted to do more, so they went with a different solution, which is their right to do, you know. Microsoft lawyer pointed out that while Activision didn't allow any of their games on streaming services, Microsoft is open to it and would have. Also, if you're hearing fireworks, there's jackasses shooting fireworks outside my house now.
Happy June 30th.
Yeah, jeez, people, come on. Dove stated that Stadia was directly competing with consoles, which goes against the FTC's view that it is a separate market. And that's the other part of this with the streaming side. The Federal Trade Commission wants streaming to be its own thing so that Microsoft, growing and helping build that market, is somehow monopolizing it, even though there's competition that has failed and gone away. Anyway, I can't make sense of that. So before we finish up, anyone want to say anything else about Stadia as much as we hate it? Let it die.
I tried it. It just didn't do much for me. And, you know, while we're going through all of this, it is basically the job of a lawyer to obfuscate logic at times and
Correct.
sway things in the way of their client.
Mhm.
You know, not necessarily, you know, some lawyers will work toward the truth regardless of who they're working for, but they still want to get paid in the end. So there's always going to be this skewing kind of thing. It just
Right.
seems a little more obvious to us because we, how do I put this? Gamers tend to take sides, you know, whether or not they realize it. So they're going to notice if something is in the air kind of thing, you know?
It
Very
also
true.
reiterates the point that if somebody as big as Google, with all their Google Fiber and all their
Google money.
stuff they put out there, everything from their phones to their own phone to their own Amazon Echo, the Chromecasts and such. So they love the idea of bouncing things around, you know, with the power of cloud and the power of the internet. But it shows
Power of friendship.
that even somebody as big as Google can't even have cloud gaming to be viable enough. Like, it's too early.
Agreed. I
It was
will
a flash
say
in the pan and it didn't work out.
I will end this with one nice thing I will say about Stadia. The controller was actually really nice, and I'm glad they made the where you could make it a normal Bluetooth controller. Yep. I have the same one, and it is an awesome controller I use with my Steam Deck.
Me too. It is great on my Steam Deck.
Yep.
Nice and responsive. I can play Street Fighter 6 all day long. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, Google, if you want to make some money, sell the controller. To hell with Stadia. Just sell me that controller. It's not bad. You could probably get it for a pretty decent price. So, all right. So that's the end of day 2. We're moving on now to day 3. So first up, we had the video deposition by PlayStation chief Jim Ryan. So he didn't actually show up in person, but they asked him questions on video and kind of sent that. It was 70 minutes long, but they jumped around a bit because parts were edited out for confidentiality because Sony apparently has a lot to hide, which I'm not saying that is a bad thing. Like, they have their records for privacy. Any of them should be able to have that. A lot of those leaked anyways, but we'll see. So Ryan believes, quote, many of their Xbox games involve an element of shooting, and many of their games involve moments of online multiplayer, both of which typically are more popular in the US than they are outside the US. One just sec.
Interesting.
Say what?
I had never thought of that. That's interesting.
Yeah, that's because they were asked about some of the stuff for why Xbox is more popular in the US than the rest of the world, and that was his response. When asked about Nintendo, he said, quote, we consider Nintendo to participate in a different market segment to Xbox and PlayStation. Nintendo's hardware technology is of a much less sophisticated nature than PlayStation or Xbox. Its hardware typically retails for a cheaper price, and its audience is aimed rather younger. End quote. Is anyone else feeling that is just really dismissive?
I think it's actually more bitter than dismissive. They don't want to say that Nintendo works for all ages. They want to say that Nintendo works for the kids.
Yeah, that's pretty much what they're trying to push at for that, I think. And also, I apologize if you're hearing somebody with a weed eater. It's dark outside, but now my neighbor is trying to weed eat something.
You've just got a cornucopia of issues.
It's just so many audio. Like, I built this game room so I'd be further out, so like nobody in the kitchen could be heard, so they could do their stuff. I could be comfortable, and like everyone decided to do stuff outside my room.
By the end, he's going to be like, "Apologies if you hear that lion outside. The zoo has."
And to your left is a podcaster.
The zoo has had a breakout, and I don't want to go outside right now.
Apologize if you hear gunfire. I live in the United States and in Florida, so
double whammy.
Yeah, the alligators
Jeremy
have
Powers of Raccoon City.
The only survivor. Oh man. So he went on and asked. Ryan actually defended the practice of having third-party exclusives, which I find this ironic, saying, quote, "The development effort required to make that game reduces because game studios can streamline development." So you guys remember that was the same reason they said Starfield is coming out now, because it lessened it. So they're agreeing on that. But he expected Bethesda games to have stayed on PlayStation because he says, "I think that pretty much every Bethesda game was multi-platform prior to the acquisition." Which at the time of the acquisition, you remember that, what was it, Deathloop and the other game were made PlayStation exclusives, at least time-wise.
Yeah, they paid him to say stay away.
Right, and they didn't come out for... Deathloop was at least a year, and Ghostwire is, I think, just now coming out, finally, on Xbox, so it's kind of a weird choice. Like, you guys are not really aware of what you're doing, are you? So he also brought up about the PlayStation 5 development kits, because they was asked about this as well after the previous question. And this is a long one. He said, "We simply could not run the risk of a company that was owned by a direct competitor having access to that information. The development kits allow developers to have visibility and to work on the feature set that our new console will deploy. Delaying dev kits would typically mean a developer may bring its content to the new platform later than would be otherwise be the case. The commercial risk associated with the knowledge of these feature sets leaking out to principal competitor is not something we'd rely on any contract to enforce." So they're admitting to why they won't give the dev kits, which, as far as I'm aware, and I have to double check this to see, but I believe they got a hold of Xbox development kits for working on like games like Major League Baseball, which Sony publishes on, the Switch and on Xbox and so forth.
And
now
you don't see Nintendo complaining about their dev kits out there.
Yeah.
I was going to say, though, this kind of smacks on the reason the PlayStation exists, in a way. It reminds me of how Nintendo pulled out of their deal with Sony at the very last moment because they didn't want to share information and rights to their software.
Well, it wasn't so much that. They had pulled where anything published on the CD format would be owned by Sony. So
yes, that's
Nintendo
it.
was like, "Oh, hell no." Like, we're not splitting it. You're taking that. So they backed out of it.
And if memory serves me correct, Xbox also approached, or Microsoft at the time, approached Sony saying, "We have a powerful console coming in development that uses DirectX," and they got laughed at, which then Bill Gates and them were just like, "Well, we'll show them."
So how many of these consoles were made out of spite?
I think some of the best ones were made out of pure anger and revenge. Also, so now we've got a weed eater. There was someone driving by with loud music and fireworks. I think gunfire is not far off. I'm kind of worried.
Are you sure Mad Max is not outside?
These are actually the lawyers involved in these cases. Just like, no, they're still talking about it. Run the weed whacker.
We got to shut him up.
He's actually got Borderlands running in the next room.
We should play Borderlands sometime. I have most of them. They're fun.
Add it to the list.
So help me God, this weekend we are playing games together.
Okay, I'll be around.
Not just Street
It's a
Fighter.
wash. Oh,
Not just. I didn't say we wouldn't.
Zangief will be
Can you
Sony.
guys hear that?
That one I heard, yes.
I just heard like somebody knock on your door, and you it was probably an explosion, wasn't it?
Yeah. It was a boom
Okay.
boom. I hate this. Anyways, so Ryan went on with concerns that Microsoft would sabotage PlayStation versions of Call of Duty or make the series exclusive, regardless of agreements Microsoft offered that Sony still has not accepted. Mind you, they also have
the contract.
well, they also have his own emails that were released on the first day saying that he didn't think Call of Duty would ever leave PlayStation and that they'll be fine. It won't be an issue. But they're complaining that the PlayStation version of Call of Duty won't be as good or will be missing issues, but they won't give the development kit, thus leading to the very issues and delays they worried about.
Yeah, it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right. Same thing they tried to argue earlier. Oh, you won't give us the better version of Minecraft. Well, you won't give us the tools to make it, so we can't make either of them. You've made this happen.
Help us help you.
It's
right.
a very odd situation. It really is.
Yes, it is.
Part of me thinks that they're only making these arguments to just prove their case. Like, this is not something they would normally even bother talking about. It would just be the kind of thing of course we're not giving them their stuff. They're the enemy. They're our rival. But now they have to put it in words for the FTC, for the judge, that kind of thing.
All right. So Ryan did eventually concede a little bit, saying, quote, because publishers have every incentive to provide an equal gaming experience or as good a gaming experience as possible on all platforms. But he also then turned around and thinks that Microsoft itself is not a publisher, but a platform holder. So apparently Sony can be a publisher and a platform holder, but Microsoft can't. Anybody else seeing that as a weird thing? Because Sony is the publisher of like the Major League Baseball games and so forth on Xbox and Switch, but Microsoft can't be a publisher even though they publish Minecraft on everything.
Flight Simulator.
Well, Flight, yeah. I mean, not even just counting PC, but like how many, like Ori and the Blind Forest, like all these Microsoft published games that came out on Switch and on other systems.
Maybe they mean first party. It feels like they're dredging up that old argument again.
I guess. I don't know. It's still, they're very back and forth. Like they're trying to talk down to a lot of it, but like only conceding where they kind of have to. But Ryan confirmed that he held a meeting with Bobby Kotick the same day Microsoft was out in Europe dealing with their regulators. Ryan told Kotick, quote, I told him that I thought the transaction was anti-competitive. I hoped that the regulators would do their job and block it. Then said, what Bobby wanted to do was cover himself by extending the marketing collaboration between Sony and Activision in the event of the transaction not proceeding. So he's basically telling them, I want this. Go ahead.
I don't know how somebody who's in an agreement with one company that CEO can just go to the competition and just talk over some beer.
It's Bobby Kotick. I'm never going to actually think that guy can't sink any lower. I'm just going to say that. I mean, he's
it's all about the money.
It's all about the Benjamins, baby.
He should have been ousted from that position a long time ago, especially after the all the allegations, the misconduct and mistreatment of employees and the women there and stuff.
That might be part of it, actually. I figure once your reputation has gone down to the shitter, pardon my French, you just don't really care anymore about your reputation. You're just going to do whatever. I mean, how much lower are people going to expect you to sink?
He complained. He complained and asked people to stop putting devil horns on his pictures because he's having trouble getting dates. And that was the funniest thing I've read in a long time.
That's awesome.
I'm like, you're a probably billionaire and you're having trouble getting dates because people will not quit literally making you out to be the devil in your dating profile. That's great. Oh, that man's considered so evil he can't even pay for hookers.
Again.
I'm just gonna go, wipe my tears with all these $100 bills and everything. So yeah, Sony's pushing for those deals, which I think they're trying to do almost like what happened with Bethesda, where Microsoft made the purchase and then honored the agreements that were made, which is why Deathloop, they didn't just pay it out and go ahead and make Deathloop, come to Xbox right then and there and all that stuff. They're trying to make it like, hey, we're gonna honor these agreements. Well, if Kotick is going behind their back with Ryan and they're extending the Call of Duty deals and doing all this other stuff, even if this goes through, how much crap is Sony going to give Microsoft saying like, oh, you have to honor all of this that we've done, even though you weren't any part of it? And sometimes it feels almost like, and Kotick will come up later, he's definitely playing both sides of this. He is trying to be the middleman who's supplying weapons and stuff to both sides of the war, as a profiteer, I think is the proper term for that, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, that sounds like his way of being.
No kidding. um, so this was kind of a fun part. When questioned by Microsoft lawyers, Ryan stated that he thought it would be better if Microsoft had kept Activision games on PlayStation, but then also stated it would not be in Microsoft's best interest to make the games available on multiple platforms. When asked what he would do if he ran Xbox, he stated, "I don't have enough knowledge to answer that question. You only run PlayStation. I think you've already answered your question," but he's like, I would make it exclusive, but they shouldn't.
I want to say
Am I the only one getting that read? Honestly,
No.
God, you sound so
I
dejected.
want to say I found that bombshell email I was referring to.
Oh, go for it.
It says in a bombshell email, Jim Ryan about Xbox exclusivity with Chris Deering, who says Microsoft would have been better off announcing an electric car than buying Activision.
That's weird. Okay. I don't even get the point of that. Like, what?
It's like, you're out of your league, man.
Wow. So Ryan was then asked if he thinks it's wrong for Microsoft to have exclusives like Redfall. And he said, I don't like it, but I fundamentally have no quarrel with it. When he was asked about what about Starfield, he said, I don't like it, but I don't view it as anti-competitive. So he keeps playing, kind of like riding that line, going back and forth on stuff like, oh, Starfield isn't anti-competitive, but they're also kind of complaining that they're not getting it. Obviously, no one's going to give a damn about Redfall. They're probably like, oh God, bullet dodged. We don't have that on our system. That was a rough one.
That's going to be the consolation prize.
Right. Who didn't get that one, thankfully. So finally he was asked about cloud gaming, and he said, quote, I would say that cloud technology will become a meaningful component of how gamers access games between 2025 and 2035. We're making significant investments in cloud in anticipation of it becoming a very meaningful way of how gamers access game content. So they're admitting that they're doing more into streaming stuff as well. So Microsoft is not the only ones making advancements in this technology at that point. So why is the FTC not going, oh, okay, well, you're working on it too. You guys make your own things. What the hell?
It's probably because it's all vagary. None of this is substantial enough to be used as evidence at this point.
True. His last thing, Ryan described Game Pass as value destructive to publishers. And apparently he went around to a bunch of publishers, or as he stated, all of them, which I'm curious what that list really is, that they all said they didn't like Game Pass, which I find funny because Game Pass actually has a pretty good list of publishers that are on there. So who did he ask? Like, are they saying they made the agreement and didn't like it?
I know there's been like a very small handful that have said it wasn't advantageous for them, but I feel that in some ways was the indie companies and not the bigger guys.
I could see that. And I'm wondering if, depending on the amount of use or size of the company, if Microsoft will adjust their payouts or something for that to make it a little more feasible for the smaller companies.
I'm put in mind of Oddworld Soulstorm. They said that Game Pass directly. No, was it Game Pass or PS Plus that they felt had
Plus.
It was
directly
PlayStation Plus,
harmed
yeah.
things? Yeah, there you go. But
Because I knew people that were
He
like,
said he
"Why
wouldn't do
buy it?
that
I just get
again.
it there."
Yeah, he said he wouldn't do that again.
Because I'm still trying to find a physical copy of it just to have for my collection. But for a lot of people, it's just grabbing it on there, and they were done with it.
honestly, usually with Game Pass, if I really like a game on Game Pass, I will end up buying it. So
The only thing I'm waiting for is if they would bring a family plan for that. Because I won't use it as much. I like having my collection and that physical bit. But the rest of my family, if they can use it on the other Xboxes I have, it would be so worth it. Because I've
They're
got one
testing
kid
it
that plays.
overseas right now.
Yeah, because I'd get the PC version, the Ultimate. Because,
Yeah,
my
they
youngest
said they're
son.
testing it overseas, and it'll function almost like a Nintendo account where you can take your profile to just another Xbox, and it'll be like, you have PC Game Ultimate.
Yeah, even if it only had 3 people on the family plan or something, that would be enough for me. Because I'd have it, my youngest son and my oldest son. We're the only 3 that would really use it in this household. Anybody else would just be like we do with our Nintendo Switch account, and we just have extended family. So would it fill out the area? So, moving on from this, NVIDIA's GeForce Now team lead Phil Eisler appears in a pre-recorded deposition as well. This is after there was a bunch of crazy back and forth with economists that it was really annoying, and I was not going to dig into that. They went round and round on the meanings of numbers and made no sense. So you're not missing anything. Anyways, Phil Eisler talked about the platform and how their streaming moved from 30 FPS all the way up to supporting 240 FPS now, which I would love to know how. Like, I get it, it runs with that, but you're saying you're streaming at that, and I just don't even know how. I can barely get.
Probably means you're sitting next to your router.
They're sitting right next to the server. They used Activision games during their beta test period, but they were pulled by Activision because they didn't want to use them for any more of that. Microsoft originally had a number of PC games available, but Matt Booty, we talked about on the first day's content, stated, quote, "We have pulled all Xbox Game Studio titles from GeForce Now so as not to compete with xCloud. I would recommend the absence of any other plans that we do the same for Bethesda titles." This was all recorded before Microsoft made a deal with NVIDIA. So now they're bringing those games over, for a bunch of their titles to GeForce Now, along with Activision titles once the deal goes through, which NVIDIA did state later they're very happy with the deal. And they said the agreement entitles us to the content provided the transaction completes on the Activision side. We have already begun working with Microsoft to onboard their first-party titles, so we're confident that that will solve our concerns here. So, I mean, that's a whole other streaming company with their own competing service that they're like, yeah, we're fine. We're getting the content. We're able to build it up. There's more than one in the market. So,
Take that, CMA.
Yeah, we'll see if that actually
Microsoft
goes.
is not the forefront of cloud streaming.
Well, at some point, I was going to bring it up later, but the CMA actually tried on the last day to delay their court case with Microsoft indefinitely. And one of their judges had to put their foot down and go, no, you can't just forever put it off. That's, you're being unfair and you have to actually do your jobs. But that would have also put Microsoft into a deal where they had to pay like I think it's like 3 point something billion dollars to Activision if they're not done with this deal by a certain time next month, or they have to negotiate if they can go longer. So that's the other part, I think, where Kodak is trying to play both sides. If this gets delayed, he'll get that payday and whatever deal he made with Sony. And I would not be surprised if Sony locked down Activision after that, if not trying to outright buy them.
They did say that they would put him on his merry way if the deal goes through.
Yeah. So we'll have to see. Next up, they had economic expert Elizabeth Bailey, PhD. I will mention that. She earned that doctorate, damn it. She did. She was called up. She stated that Call of Duty is not essential, critical, or a must-have game. It's not a unicorn. And I think that's actually a really good point. Like Call of Duty is really popular, but it wasn't always popular and it won't always be popular. Like one day Call of Duty will just be an old game. Seriously, you're going to hurt yourself. Keep doing that, Steven. Faking a drink every time. I'm like, I'm going to kill a man. And that's, part of the FTC's argument as well is that Call of Duty is irreplaceable, that it's, needed for all of this marketing. But she argued that the FTC numbers used are focused on the US only and ignore the worldwide standings. Also stated Xbox mobile revenue is, quote, less than 0.5% of overall mobile gaming revenue. Activision Blizzard is also very small in mobile gaming, so combined, they'll have 3.8% of mobile gaming. So even though this merger is a big step for Microsoft into mobile gaming, there's still going to be a tiny fish in that pond. Because there are so many other larger companies that are still making mobile games, as well as Apple and Google themselves with a lot of things.
But they'll have King to help them.
Yeah, no, I think King will be a good one for development. She concluded her testimony saying Call of Duty is an important game and it's a popular game, but there's nothing to suggest it's uniquely important. She also noted that the Switch has grown 35% without a single Call of Duty game, which I think is a pretty good argument on that one. And also part of why the FTC wants the Switch ruled out of this. Because they haven't had a Call of Duty since the Wii U. And I think they've done just fine.
Also, I don't see it mentioned here, but when, which is the next day, Bobby Kotick gets to speak. He actually said, playing Call of Duty 2 on a mobile phone is like using a refrigerator for a safe.
Yeah, I didn't include that quote because it didn't make sense.
I was like, Call of Duty 2?
Yeah, I mean, I knew that was an older quote, but I was like, what are you on?
Just so we can preface, just so we can preface how this guy is.
Yeah, so we'll go ahead and move on to day 4. We're almost through this. And this is when they actually did bring Bobby Kotick, the Activision CEO, to the stand. So when he was asked why Call of Duty isn't exclusive to one platform, Bobby stated, quote, "You'd alienate 100 million monthly active players. You would have a revolt if you were to remove the game from one platform. Gamers are incredibly passionate. You get invested in the experience. It's like a sport." Which, yeah, there are a lot of people that just play Call of Duty. Like they buy the system. That's all they play. Same thing. Like there's people that buy systems and only play Madden, and things like that. So Kotick regrets not bringing Call of Duty to Switch. He actually said, "I made a bad judgment. It's probably the second biggest video game system of all time." Yeah. Like it's been around for a bit. He was also asked about if Sony's fears or claims that Microsoft would degrade Call of Duty for PlayStation. He said, "Your vitriol from gamers, that would be well deserved. People who make video games have great pride in the work they do." Funny that he's talking about developers with regards to pride with the stuff that he does, but I mean, he's right. People aren't trying to put out bad games on purpose unless they specifically are saying they're trying to make a bad one on purpose for a joke. I think it's the only way that works. The Microsoft lawyer pointed out different maps and weapons on platforms, and Kotick said it's not degrading the game on platforms. It's marketing. So
sure, Jan.
Yeah. So according to him, Xbox players that aren't getting all this content and other things that PlayStation players are getting, it's not degrading the game for you at all. You're still getting it. It's fine. You're just not getting this extra marketing that they're putting in. So I'm really hoping if this goes through that ends.
Maps are like levels. You're missing a level.
Oh yeah, for the last Call of Duty, there was over a year you were missing an entire mode. Not only maps, but modes, weapons, skins.
It's just marketing. So when Switch is the inferior version, it's just marketing.
Like right now in the current one, you get like 25% weapons XP bonus if you play with people in a PlayStation party. But they were nice enough to allow people, if you're playing with an outside party, someone on Xbox or PC, you can still get it as long as there's two PlayStation people, but that other person won't get any XP. Like, that's fantastic. They won't be, wondering why they're so far behind trying to level stuff up while their buddies are jumping up and getting more
Why are
more
you a higher
levels.
tier? Marketing.
Right. How long before they're like, hey, we can't play with you anymore. We have to go to this tier now that we're this level to play competitively. You got to go, do all this stuff to get caught up.
Yeah,
So
you know what else failed because of marketing?
What?
Marvel versus Capcom Infinite. Oh, nobody wanted Wolverine. He sucks. It's okay. These characters play the exact same way. You're not missing anything. Who cares?
Oh, that game was so...
You've got Black Panther. You're good.
Oh, man. That one hurts me. So Judge Corley actually asked about why World of Warcraft is a $15 a month game instead of a $70 purchase, which he mostly just went in and saying, like, we make the content, and it basically tried to explain just what an MMO is. So they make content that goes on for a period of time, so they pay a monthly fee on it. But I thought it was interesting that she asked that. So Kotick doesn't like Game Pass or any of the subscription services. He says, quote, I have general aversion to the idea of multi-game subscription services. Maybe part of it being in Los Angeles and having large, big media companies move their content to these subscription streaming services, and the business's results have suffered. Really ironic coming from a guy that pretty much eats up other companies and makes them Call of Duty slaves.
That next line's a winner.
Huh?
I said that next point is a winner there. They have no revenues.
Yep. They have no revenues from these kinds of services and no plans to have Call of Duty on one. They have experimented with some.
No plans? I wonder where I can play Call of Duty World at Cold War next month.
Oh, PlayStation Plus. Shocking. Federal Trade Commission points out that Call of Duty was the #1 selling console game for 13 years in a row. Kotick confirmed this, as well as Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 made $1 billion within 10 days of its launch in 2022. And the FTC argues that no other game has come close. And I'm kind of curious, sales-wise, what has been the highest selling game at launch. Probably would be a Call of Duty. I would not be surprised by that, but
I don't know. I want to say Grand Theft Auto 5 wants to have a conversation. Has entered the chat.
I think that's highest long term, but not launch.
It's still going. It's still up there.
Yeah, but how many times has it launched? How many?
Yeah, I think they mean.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah. Like, really?
Sorry, go ahead.
Huh. I was going to say I thought that he meant like at release, not afterward.
Steven's actually right, anyways.
Cool.
Grand Theft Auto 5, 2013. It hit $1 billion as well in 3 days.
That's pretty
not
cool.
10, 3.
That's all. Like, FTC doesn't know what they're talking about.
Yeah, that's. Wow, that's really fast.
It's the game that just doesn't give up. It's made like hundreds. So of what they're claiming. So it's like.
That's a lot of money. So at this point, they're just trying to stroke the ego and show like, oh, Call of Duty is so important, it's worth so much money, to make it seem like if Microsoft buys them, that they would be pulling this from everybody else, even though they've put all of this stuff out there saying it's not. The FTC stated Activision hasn't signed any deals to offer Call of Duty first on other platforms to make that timed exclusivity, but then Kotick responded, it's possible. Hint, hint, Sony, pay us more money and we'll make this go away on Xbox if we can. FTC tried to make Kotick say that Activision would be open to putting their games on streaming services if the price is right, but Kotick still pushed back on this because he just doesn't like streaming services at all. Even though for the subscription stuff, as you said, Call of Duty is coming to PlayStation. The FTC also argued that since Activision doesn't have the experience to make Call of Duty for mobile, which was weird because they have a mobile Call of Duty, how could they make a version for Switch? Because that keeps coming up. So Kotick talked back and responded, quote, literally from a high level, they could evaluate what would be required, or they could envision a game that they might make on Switch. So I guess that's the fancy way of saying, I don't know, we'd think about it. Like,
We would call up Panic Button and be like, "Hey, can you do us a fave?
You guys do a lot of shit. You made Doom Eternal run really well on the Switch. Can you give us Call of Duty?"
Either that or give us the Saber Interactive that did Mortal Kombat 11, or give us over to the other company that's helping with the other game that got announced at the Direct. But literally, there's like at least 3 or 4 companies that can work miracles. So
yeah, they specialize in this kind of thing.
And I buy those. Like, I bought Doom Eternal from them, not because I was like, I have it on the Series X, I have it on PC, it runs absolutely fantastic, but like the fidelity they managed to pull off on the Switch still shocks me, and I love playing it just to see, like, how did you guys get away with this?
And even that gyro aiming, it just feels good.
Yeah, and they're like, well, it's it's running at 30 FPS, but it's running pretty stable. Like, it's still fun to play. Like, it's amazing.
Talking like this right now, I feel like the hearing should have had more geeks. Well,
we should have been called to the stand. Sir. Just push the glasses.
Might I interject? That's the thing. Like, all these hearings are coming from people who are thinking more about properties and profits.
And Phil Spencer's there just going like, God damn it, I could say so many things right now. He's having to keep his mouth shut. Like, I just want to say,
like, I'm not on the stand.
I'm a gamer. Oh man. So Kotick found out that Microsoft about the Microsoft Call of Duty for Nintendo Switch and future Nintendo system announcements from a news report. He then stated, we would consider it once we have the specs, but we don't have them at present. We missed out on the opportunity for this past generation of Switch, but we'd have to wait until the specifications. We don't have any present plans to do so. Somehow people took this as like, oh, Kotick must know what the next Nintendo system is. Like, he pretty clearly says he doesn't, guys. How do you desperately pull that statement out of this?
Well, that's the other side of geeks. That's the other side of geeks. It's like, oh, he said it. He said it. It must be true. The eagerness.
Right? If the merger doesn't go through, Activision would bring Call of Duty to Nintendo unless they, as he said, if we didn't have the resources and there was something wrong with the specifications.
Something wrong.
Yeah, I don't know what that even would mean. Like, I don't think it's going to be any weaker.
I heard Xbox gave you some suggestions, so something wrong with your specifications.
If it doesn't have ray tracing, it's just not good enough. And when he asked if he would bring it to Switch, he said, I think we would consider it, and it was something, and if it was something where we could make a great game, we'd likely consider it. It's the most CEO talk he could come out with. Like, he gave no answers about that whole part. He was just like, yeah, we might. We'd think about it. Depends on what they make. Like, cool. Like, you guys grilled Spencer to try and swear an oath on the stand. Y'all are just like, make this for Switch. No, we're good. So this brings us.
Can you imagine that?
Say what?
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just like, it amuses me. This goes back to the contract thing where they would just go like, no, you were under oath, so now you have to make those games.
This must happen. Harumph, harumph. So we'll take a little break from the legal part of this and jump into a complete clerical fuck up. Let's just say that right now. So there was a major blunder with redacted files from both Sony and a little bit from Microsoft, which unveiled information they originally intended to keep private. This was caused by how a Sharpie marker showed information through it when it was scanned into the computer. This was all pulled from the public records, but by then all the media, reporters, and everybody else had already downloaded it because it was publicly available. So the damage was done. They're out there. They're never going away. But a few tidbits that got pulled were kind of interesting. Horizon Forbidden West, which I actually bought this week. I finally get to start playing it. It cost $212 million over 5 years with 300 employees to make. The Last of Us Part 2 cost $220 million with only about 200 employees. Sony claims 1 million PlayStation gamers only play Call of Duty. It's like that's all they play. Sony apparently shares around 10% with third-party publishers like Activision, with Activision pushing for their 30% deal with Microsoft. So, yeah, you can kind of see how that weird thing is going. I wonder how much they make off of their marketing deals as well. And then Sony has one more Call of Duty game coming late 2023 as part of its exclusive marketing deal with Activision. So later this year, we're supposed to get another Call of Duty, and they will be getting special features and things with that title as well.
It's just marketing, though.
Yeah, it's just marketing. We're only missing out on God knows what.
They'll
It's
probably
like
be like multiplayer will be coming soon later to Xbox.
Right, it's like the Avengers game. Like, hey, I paid the same amount for this, but I don't get Spider-Man? Yeah. So the Microsoft stuff that came out was really a weird one. They had a listing of potential acquisitions leak out when it was scanned and posted without redaction, which I don't know who did that. Like someone just scanned it and put it up with nothing on it. So I don't know if that was a clerk's error or what. This was fixed later in a later version, but it was like, it was already out there. What's the point? But some of the highlights include they were looking at buying Bungie. This was before Sony got them again. Square Enix, Sega, IO Interactive, Niantic, ironically enough, they're looking for mobile stuff, Supergiant Games, and like other ones they were looking at. They were even looking at like Playground Games, the people that made No Man's Sky, just all kinds of people. And what really hurts is each listing had a good and a bad about them. So like that's just like making notes about the people you're thinking of dating, and they all find the list of like what's good and what's bad about each person.
Well, there'll be some interesting conversations the next
Right.
time they make games for those
Well,
consoles.
I heard they wanted Square Enix for a mobile Game Pass because they felt that Square Enix would have the strongest mobile help
Library.
next to Niantic, but Niantic is kind of a one-trick pony with what they're doing, while Square Enix has a multitude of mobile titles on both the Enix side of properties and the Square side of properties.
Yeah, and if I remember, Niantic will probably be brought up on our next show because they've had a bunch of layoffs and stuff go on. So
what happens when you make the same game with a different theme?
it's called a skin pack, man. Just sell it to people and move on.
That just brings me in. That makes me think of Rovio. They had the same problem. Angry Birds for days.
I mean, when I had a Star Wars Angry Birds on my Wii U, we had a problem.
And who bought them? Was that Atari?
I think so. Yes,
probably the
Atari
shambling corpse
Atari
of Atari.
Recently bought Atari just bought a bunch of companies, and nobody cares because Atari.
It's Atari.
Ouch.
Well, I'm not wrong.
It's either that or it's because this is the elephant in the room, while everything else is just fireworks and weed eaters in his backyard. So,
I mean, at least they managed to get some kind of system release with that weird Atari PC clone thing. That's a step up from the Intellivision. That is just put it out of its misery. It's Grundlefly at this point. All right, so Dr. Elizabeth Bailey was brought back out. Most of what she covered, she analyzed a 10-week period after the Switch launched and found a decline in the number of gamers on Xbox and PlayStation consoles, as well as the time played on them. So they keep making the argument that they're not competitive, but when the Switch came out, it basically decimated the numbers for the other companies for a while. And I would love to see current numbers when Tears of the Kingdom came out, if that happened all over again. Because people, like, I lost almost 150 hours playing that game just to when I got to finish the story. I'm still playing it, but I'm taking a little bit of a break and playing other things. But that's 150 hours. I was not touching a single other console. or game even. I think at most I was playing Street Fighter with you guys. She also argues, along with Microsoft, that it's about where the gamer spends their time, not what platform, that determines the popularity of it. So I guess, that's kind of legitimizing the Switch as well. If people are spending their time there, that is competition. That's what you're competing for time. So, all right. Next up, NVIDIA's Jeff Fisher did a video deposition as well. States that GeForce Now doesn't cannibalize the existing games market, as the users tend to use, quote, lower end and incompatible systems to access games. I do believe accessibility does bring in new gamers to high-end PC gaming. So he was kind of bringing out the PC master race arguments with stuff. I mean, he does work for NVIDIA, so that kind of makes sense. They want you using their, 4090s and stuff.
Put in a good word for us here.
Right. I saw a thing today. It was like, oh, the 4090 is available at Best Buy. I was like, that's funny. It was like, oh, that's how much money? No, I'm good. I'm going to, my 1070 Ti is still kicking. We're going to live with that for a while.
We'll just tape 2 Series X's together and we've got power.
It's like, you know what? The most PC gaming I've had recently has been Power Wash Simulator, and I can crank up every setting, play it in actual 4K on this computer. I'm good. I don't need more than that. I have consoles for that stuff. So he went on to tell the FTC NVIDIA Cloud Gaming offers a superior experience to Xbox, or at least similar to or better than it, and a tier of service better than what PlayStation offers. This doesn't sound like a testimony, but like, hey, we have a special commercial guest that we're going to let talk about their service before they go.
Now, a word from our sponsor.
Yeah, right. All he needs to do is crack open a Mountain Dew while he's up there being talked to. If they were allowed to film it, it would complete the trilogy there. He then quoted saying, "It's my strong belief that cloud gaming has a profitable future." But more importantly, when asked about the actual Activision Blizzard merger with Microsoft, Fisher stated, "I think it's good for the industry." So that's a pretty good bit kind of in Microsoft's favor as well, I believe. Now, this one I was kind of surprised they actually did. They brought out Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella to take the stand. That's like the big wig who took over from, I think he took over from Ballmer, and Ballmer had taken over from Gates, I believe. If I remember the succession of the Microsoft lords. I don't know. I'm not required to know those. So the Federal Trade Commission asked if Microsoft exceeded its metric for the gaming business. Nadella responded, "Yes, we set it low," which is the funniest thing I've heard. It's like, yes, they exceeded the numbers. We just made the numbers really down here. That's, do you guys think that's almost like talking like, yeah, my kid does good in school. We just expect him to at least get C's. Like he does okay.
Oh boy.
That's also why they stopped like reporting at some point of how many people signed up for Game Pass for a while. They were like, oh, and that's also on the other side why Activision stopped telling you subscriber numbers for a while. Yep. World of Warcraft.
Well, that just goes into a whole other argument when it comes to streaming subscriptions and live service. Eventually, you're going to reach a plateau where everybody that wanted it has it.
But when you need to appease your stockholders or shareholders, you're going to spin things.
Fair. That's not going to make it any different, though.
Re-release the Hounds. Or remaster the Hounds.
Remaster the Hounds, then re-release the Hounds. Put the Hounds on streaming.
Port them over there. Make a DS version. So I kind of thought that Nadella's testimony would be very CEO and kind of boring. He actually brought up some interesting points for kind of how he views this stuff. Or at least I thought he did. So Microsoft's own lawyer asked Nadella his thoughts on exclusives. And he responded, "If it was up to me, I would love to get rid of the entire exclusives on consoles, but that's not for me to define, especially as a low share player in the console market. The dominant player there, Sony, has defined market competition using exclusives. So that's the world we live in. I have no love for that world. I was like, okay. So he really does, like he said, he said prior, wants to treat this almost like they do Microsoft Word, Excel, Teams, all that stuff, where it's just available everywhere, their software, and you can have it and use it. But because that isn't going to work, because like PlayStation is so set on exclusives, you always see that only on PlayStation, exclusive to PlayStation.
I see that as a difference in viewpoint, if I may
Okay,
interject.
yeah, go for it. I'd love to hear it.
Um, since Microsoft is more of a software company and they're
Mm-hmm.
used to distributing their stuff to everybody,
Mm-hmm.
naturally that would be the route they would choose. I'm gonna actually compare this to something else in
Okay.
uh, my own instance, because I have a friend who is a programmer and he uses Chat GPT to help him come up with stuff all the time. And I noticed that many programmers are used to having their stuff shared, so they don't think AI is that much of a threat.
Right.
And I, as a creative, am worried that, stuff is going to be taken from me and altered, whereas it has my own specific signature. So there are two specific, very different viewpoints on the solution there, I think, between a software company and a video game company.
Okay. I can see that.
That's just my view, though.
No, I've had a coworker. He was trying to use that for some of the programming he was doing, and I had kind of argued, like, dude, that's just taking other people's work and repackaging it for you, and you don't even have a way to verify it without testing, running all of it.
That's
And
what programmers do all the time, though.
that's
And
true.
they're
And
totally fine with it.
yeah, you're gonna
If it
find your own
breaks,
ways
it's
to
not
do
a
it.
bug, it's a feature.
And
Yeah, so he was
anytime I've
actually
had to
like,
do that, go ahead.
yeah, he was actually, his eyes were open too. It's like, oh, I didn't think of it that way. And that's the thing. Programmers and creators are going to butt heads on this all the time. So there you go. When companies start from different ends, they're always going to think from their side. So
Yeah,
that's basically what I saw with this recent
I
bit.
also feel like every CEO is going to say that. Put the Coke CEO up there. If it was up to me, I'd love to get rid of the entire Coke versus Pepsi. I'd like everybody to just drink Coke, but it's not for me to decide.
That's hilarious. I'd like everyone to drink Pepsi. I mean, Coke.
well, I think in that regards, it wouldn't be so much that would be them saying like, hey, we'll be able to license out the recipe to Coke. All the people can make it following that recipe on their factories, and we get money from that. I think would be a more apt comparison of the Coke Pepsi thing.
Yeah, I can see that.
I think that would be how it is. And as for the AI stuff, I think I'm still not a big fan of AI for a lot of the stuff. Like you have the funny little haha, we've done some weird, like, this is how this would look in this, which I still think takes a lot of people's work and weird stuff. But some people are using it as an actual tool, while others are using it as a means to, like you said, take people's work and recreate things or just hodgepodge and Frankenstein it. And
Yeah,
I think
use
that's
it
the
as a
biggest
guide,
difference on it.
not as a replacement tool. Use it as a guide.
Well, a lot of companies are actually stamping down on that. Steam is actually removing AI made games.
Mm-hmm.
So there are things being done about that.
Yeah, because it comes down to different stuff. I know I saw some things like from the guys that did, and this will be the last little thing before we move on real quick. Um, the guys that made the newer version of Mist admitted like they're a really small company, like their entire like CEO, secretaries, everything included. There's only like 50 people, so they were using AI to help make some of the extra text and things like that were put into the game because they had no way of actually filling that out without taking forever. So that's been kind of a weird debate on how that's used by that creator, I don't know if that was pulled from their own stuff, which I think they tried to do, or if it was pulled from anyone else's, which brings up
Yeah, I
all
also
kinds of
think you shouldn't
questions.
use it. You shouldn't use it as a, well, I couldn't afford the real thing either.
Oh, like Marvel's openings to Secret Invasion. That's still aggravating.
Well, theirs is different. They have the money.
Yeah, they
They
just
just
don't
decided
want to spend it.
to be dirty like that. But if it's like me and I want to write a book, I'm not going to be like, "Hey, ChatGPT, write me a book," because I can't afford to put
Be a
everything
ghostwriter.
together to write it. Yeah.
I think if anything, anybody who uses AI that should be the first thing they say in any of their products.
That's
I
fair.
use AI, so I shall die. Okay.
Make that a T-shirt. I'm sure someone will use
That'd be
AI
the
to
line.
generate that shirt.
If I use AI, I shall die. And then the console wars is a social construct.
I actually kind of want that shirt. Anyways,
Just don't ever. What you just said though, never say on Twitter because the bots will come in and make a shirt. So don't do that.
Twitter's so broken. I don't think the bots even work correctly now. All right. So Microsoft lawyer then went on and asked, will Microsoft forego sales of Call of Duty on PlayStation by withholding access? Which Nadella responded, it makes no economic sense or no strategic sense. Our goal with Activision in particular in their content and our content is to get it on more platforms. That's what we've done with Office, and that's what I want to do with gaming. Then the lawyer asked, will you commit to continue delivering Call of Duty on PlayStation? Which Nadella said 100%.
100%.
Now, that's the highest of Microsoft. So if he can say it, that's something Phil does not have the power to agree to. He can say what he's allowed to, but
the Microsoft lawyer didn't say future PlayStations.
Yeah, he just said on PlayStation.
He just said he'd put it on PlayStation 1. That's it.
Yep. So they didn't really talk too much with Nadella. I guess they kind of let him go early on that. They had economics expert Dennis Carlton called in, but most of that testimony is private as they were covering protected information. And it was a back and forth where the FTC was trying to discredit him. But if you've ever seen stuff with lawyers, you're always trying to discredit expert witnesses on the other side. That's just a normal part of it. Because if you discredit what they say, then anything they do say gets thrown out. So, all right. So we're on the final day, day 5 of this lovely trial. I don't have all the notes here, but we do have a lot of it we can cover anyways. Started off because this was supposed to be the closing arguments between both of them. And good God, it took a while. Microsoft's CFO, Amy Hood's testimony was filed as a written declaration and agreement with both sides. So they said she didn't have to come and testify. We'll just take this brief. But she had some statements from it I wanted to at least add. So she talked about the Call of Duty exclusivity not being a part of Microsoft's rationale with the acquisition, saying, quote, the possibility of making Call of Duty exclusive to Xbox was never assessed or discussed with me, nor was it even mentioned in any presentations or discussions with the board of directors. I understood the necessity of keeping Call of Duty on other platforms. The acquisition's strategic rationale and financial valuation are both aligned towards making Activision games more widely available, not less. So a very corporate way of saying, well, yeah, we're still going to put that out on other places. So she continued saying, over time, we are striving to increase Xbox's operating margin to bring it closer to those of Microsoft's other lines of businesses. Another important component of the financial analysis was that the purchase had to be financially lucrative, to Microsoft shareholders in year 1, meaning the acquisition must immediately contribute to an increase in earnings per share. So they're saying that once this goes through, the Activision Blizzard part of it has to be making money within a year. So they've got a lot of pressure on them to actually get this stuff going and make a use for it. So restricting that to one system is not going to do them any good. So, all right. After that, they brought Xbox CFO Tim Stewart onto the stand. Most of what he talked about was Project Denali, which ends up being, that was the code name that was given to the Activision Blizzard merger, or the whole deal. When he was questioned about market share by the FTC, Tim pointed out that it excludes Nintendo Switch and Xbox One PS4 consoles, and that it only shows the US. So Tim then asked about the Japanese markets and pointed out the data is not that reliable for other markets in this case. Basically, like the numbers you're showing me don't mean a damn because you're leaving all this stuff out. Data was talked about in regards to Game Pass pricing versus Sony subscription pricing, with Stewart saying day and date games are a key differentiator for Game Pass, which I think I've seen that a lot where they're like, Sony doesn't want to have the games available day one. You have to wait to play them on, buy them new. While Game Pass would be like, hey, the day it comes out, you can just go download it and you're good to go. As long as you have Game Pass, the new Forza you'll get it that day. The new, when Starfield comes out, people will be playing it that day on Game Pass, and I guarantee a lot of people will be. So I think that would be. I mean, do you guys agree that's a good differentiating thing, or do you even care? I don't use Game Pass, so I'm just kind of wondering what you guys think. Steven?
Yeah, it's I guess if I tried to put the pricing into scale,
Mm-hmm.
then Game Pass is the better deal. Game Pass has the better pricing structure because it seems like you're paying less, but overall for a whole year you're paying a lot more. But you're also getting day one games on Game Pass.
Yeah.
Yeah, like anything else, it really depends on what you're using it for and how often.
Yeah, it's like with
And it's not
Netflix.
something that's integrated with Sony's play online mentality where you're going to miss out on PlayStation Plus because you have this. And it's like, no, you can have gold, but then you can also have Game Pass Ultimate too.
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down cost wise. Like, if you pay for Netflix, it's worthless if you're not watching that much. If you watch a lot of stuff, it becomes more worth it because you're using it for that time. If you're not playing that many games on it, like I mostly play disc based games, so it wouldn't do much good for me. But if I can share it with my family and they will use it a lot, then it becomes more of a value to me for me to use. Or if somebody
Mm-hmm.
else plays a lot of games, that could be
Yeah.
how they get them, and they get all the new ones without having to worry about paying that outright amount each time. So, not to shill for Game Pass, I'm just like, that kind of makes sense. Um, so FTC brings up the November 2022 meeting about not pulling Bethesda games, where Stewart stated, "We want that content in the long run to be either first or better or best, and pick your differentiated experience on our platforms. We will want Bethesda content to show up the best on our platforms." And he stated Game Pass could be a better experience. Continues stating better could be showing up in resolution. I suspect you'll continue to see us push for a first, better, or best approach on our platforms. And they're trying to make that as the argument as well, that Call of Duty would be lesser on PlayStation because they would want it to be better in some way on Xbox. Which, yeah, that statement could be viewed that way a little bit. But I also don't, I don't know how that would actually feel. How do you guys feel that statement fits in that regard? Should that be a concerning one for PlayStation?
No,
Okay.
it's every, I don't feel that Microsoft ever tries to just get the game finished and out the door. They want to play to its strength, and because they don't think of Switch as a competitor or as a console, at least to the FTC, the Switch will always be the best approach, best version it can be, hopefully. That's what it strives for with a lot of these games, that when we see it come out for all three of them, it's Switch's best version. So why can't we have the best PlayStation can do and the best Xbox Series X can do? I'm sorry, Sony, if are you worried that we're gonna see cracks in your armor there that just show us that it's not as powerful, doesn't have as many teraflops or FPSs, there's not enough ray tracing to be had. I don't see why Microsoft would not just be like, we want the games that we're sharing with the other platforms to elevate. We want them to, everybody who owns that system, to buy it for that system, or at least have the choice.
Yeah, it's like with Cuphead. I ended up buying Cuphead on Switch instead of Xbox because I wanted it portable, but it still played really well. Chris, you have anything you want to add?
It's just a very strange, uh, how to put it. It's a very strange argument at the moment because we shouldn't be bothering about all this at this point. Technology has reached a point where it's not even about graphical power anymore. It's about how much of the game you can fit on your hard drive. And we just we need to step back a little bit and just worry more about the games themselves. So if it's going to be about exclusives, power, teraflops, then pretty soon we're not going to be buying consoles anymore. We're just going to be buying storage drives.
Yeah, because at some point, everything becomes so similar trying to get to that point that, you find. I think that's part of why the Switch is doing so well because, yeah, it's weaker, but a lot of its stuff has been so differentiated, so unique with how it's set up with visual art style and gameplay ideas.
And I think that's why they were trying so hard not to include Switch in the argument. Because when you bring up Call of Duty, you're depending on stagnation.
Yeah.
And if you lose that stagnation, if people just suddenly decide there's something better than Call of Duty, well, there goes that market share.
Which someday they will. I mean, the Battlefield for a while was starting to kind of come up. I was wondering if that was going to take over. And then, I'm trying to remember what the series was that came before. It was Medal of Honor. That's what it was. That,
Why did
even
they bring up Fortnite?
Yeah, brought up Fortnite for the how it runs on the Switch, that it's capable of doing the shooters. But like Medal of Honor, that was what inspired the Call of Duty developers originally. So like that was a game that got them to make theirs. So one day someone will be inspired by Call of Duty and make something that supplants it, you know? It's inevitable. I just keep seeing Thanos. It's inevitable. Oh
Should
man.
have went for.
Say what?
I said they should have went for the head.
If I knew I was going to make that joke, I should have brought my Infinity Gauntlet in here. Of course, that thing's loud and lights up, but whatever. So after this, we finally got to hear from Nintendo. Oh, wait, no, we didn't. Senior VP of Developer Relations at Nintendo, Steve Singer, gave a video deposition that was completely sealed. Nothing got out from it. Even Nintendo's court cases, with all these leaks, they still don't leak anything. So this is I'm putting the conspiracy hat on. I think they had to discuss some of their next system's specs, trying to argue
And
if the system will be able to play Call of Duty.
I was doing a deep dive into what a lot of these analysts and such were getting from the court case, and it did say here when they looked further into it, when Bobby Kotick was on the stand, he did reveal that apparently the successor to the Switch is close to Generation 8, which is PlayStation 4 and Xbox One.
I thought he said he thought it would be, but not that it was.
People are taking it two different. People are taking it two different ways. There's a half that says he revealed, and then there's the other half saying he alluded,
or he opined.
Yeah, I could see him applying to that as well. I don't think, especially as how Activision has treated Nintendo this last generation, Nintendo is in no rush to give him any information. He is on the bottom of that list.
Game on Switch.
Yeah, at this point they'd be like, "We'll give you Call of Duty," and they're like, "We haven't needed Call of Duty. We're good. Like we don't need you. We've moved on."
The Blizzard side gave Nintendo love. The Activision side was just like, yeah. They're like Crash, but I don't think Crash.
I think
they gave a few, and that was it.
To be absolutely honest, Microsoft themselves would probably get a developer kit before Activision would, just because Microsoft has worked with Nintendo so well for them to work on their version of Minecraft and to port some of their other games over, because they've had a really good relationship the past few years, I think.
Fair.
But yeah, it's kind of sad that Microsoft, I think, would be the first one before Activision. So who knows? All right, so we're out of the notes and now we're going back to the Verge article a little bit. So we're going to be kind of picking at a few things because now we're getting into a little bit last minute testimony and the closing arguments of both sides, which gets really messy because the FTC once again starts trying to make arguments during it, which I know they had to go through like 3 lawyers at least during their closing arguments just to try and bring their statement back to some sensibility because they just kept veering off and making arguments. But yeah, like they brought up the whole dump trucks of money phrase because Tim Stewart had that brought up in an email. And they asked him, have you ever heard the amount of money that's been spent? Like you've said, dump trucks of money. Stewart replied, I have a friend of work who likes to say dump trucks of money. I referred to him. It's like, friend likes to say it. I just said it. Like, did they actually expect?
But it was sunny today. Are you saying that if the deal goes through, that Microsoft will have sunny days with Call of Duty?
How much money is sunny days worth? Like, what?
What are the specs of Sunny?
Oh,
Does
man.
Sunny have ray tracing?
Right. Are you talking about your ray tracing stuff? That's what you mean, sunny?
Code word.
So when they were talking to them, they also had to bring up some of the Xbox pricing changes, which Microsoft did announce recently that they're having to raise the price for some of their services and their consoles in a few different countries. They didn't raise them in the US, which is the same thing that Sony did a couple months back, where they raised the price of the PlayStation 5 and their PlayStation Plus subscriptions in other countries, not the US. So that kind of explains, that's just something they have to go through when they're doing these things. Let's see here. I'm trying to think what else we had to cover on this, because that's pretty much how it goes for most of this court case, other than their closing arguments, which is them just circling back with everything they had.
Now they either get the injunction or they don't.
Yeah, we did have one surprise thing. Canada, their competition bureau ended up writing into the judge during the end of this saying, hey, we contest what Microsoft is saying, that they wanted to put an argument in about the merger. And Microsoft responded back basically saying, yeah, the time for that is past. You're too late. You should have done this earlier. I was like, damn.
But we just got the wildfires under control.
So they apparently were trying to shut that down and they just can't. Let's see. Any good stuff?
Sorry, but the FTC just reminds me of the failed TikTok ban.
Oh yeah, no.
The way
really
they just tried to, without knowing what they're talking about, just try to say, are you saying TikTok's in my house so TikTok can see when I turn off the lights? Like, no, that's not how it works.
Oh, Lord. So some more of the stuff they went into, they talked about Xbox having a mobile store, what they were trying to do with like iOS, Apple and Google, but they blocked it. So they weren't able to have their games on there in that way. It assumes we're able to monetize the store on iOS and Android. Xbox CFO Tim Stewart admitted if they were going to be able to do this. Microsoft and Spotify are both hoping that the EU's Digital Markets Act will force them to allow other stores to be accessible. Because Google can sometimes allow that, which you can get like the Amazon store or stuff like that on there. But Apple has it just locked down. You're not allowed to have any other stores on there whatsoever. And, Apple's kind of the more popular one, even though Google has the larger market just by pure numbers, with Android. Now, it did come up during part of this that if Microsoft actually did make Call of Duty exclusive, it kind of slipped out how many subscribers that Microsoft would have to get increasing for Game Pass in order to make it up. And they'd have to get an extra 2 million subs a year just to offset that exclusivity, which they use as kind of part of their argument of like, why would we do this? We're not going to get 2 million more people just for that. So, I don't know. I'm curious how Game Pass, if that's going to actually work out for them, or if they're going to continue hemorrhaging for it.
I do know, especially as you saw by my motion before I threw out my drink, I was drinking too much from Call of Duty, that even the judge at one point says, guys, we're just talking about Call of Duty. There's more to this than Call of Duty. They're forgetting all of Blizzard for the most part, except for little passing glances of what's WoW, what's World of Warcraft, will Diablo still be on PlayStation? They're just as like successful and have millions of players as well. And yes, they probably have millions of players who play only Diablo on PC and only World of Warcraft on PC. For them to just make this whole thing about Call of Duty has got to be confusing some people, because they're like, what? Like, isn't there? I doubt that the whole reason they're doing it is just for Call of Duty. It is a bigger component than the rest of their titles, sure, but like you said, the ability to let all the companies kind of spread out and thrive at what they're known to make can just make a richer experience for all the gamers. It's just the people who expect like a yearly iteration every time.
Yeah, I mean, like, real quick, I just pulled up Activision games, and it's kind of sad how long this list goes on of just variations of Call of Duty before anything else shows up. Where you start thinking, like, even old stuff, like, hey, technically, won't they be getting Pitfall? Like, that's a classic one that can be brought up in there. Some of the other games they published, the Tony Hawk series, are they going to get the license for that now? Or at least the engine to be able to make more games? They've got the stuff.
And even those, I think at this point in time, with the size of phones, would benefit being on mobile for stuff like Tony Hawk.
Yeah.
Because it's just easy to slide around and do tricks and stuff. So a lot of this, they gain to expand certain areas that they want to expand. And, I don't think it's fair to just point out, like, look at that giant Call of Duty. I was just like, it can have a bad day. You don't know when it's going to happen. It's had bad games, but it can have a bad day.
Yeah. When they were continuing talking with Stewart, they were talking about how the Series S pricing, how it was set. And they actually did say, he said, quote, yes, at that price point, when you're considering playing FIFA or Minecraft or any other games across platform, you have to make sure you're priced relative to the competition in the market, which they were asking if it was attached with the Switch. So they did confirm the Series S was priced to be competitive to that, which makes sense. That thing's actually surprisingly cheap for its size. So
yeah, and I'm even seeing some things akin to Nintendo's Wii U and Wii woes happening to Series S, where they have to make concessions to Baldur's Gate 3 because they really want split screen to work on Series S.
mm-hmm.
So I feel that in some ways Series S is holding Microsoft back. And yeah, they made a bigger storage one, but I still think having to have two different resolutions or processing powers can't be doing them any favors.
Well, I mean, in the flip side of that, though, there are a lot of games that are also being made for the Switch, and whatever system comes out after the Switch is going to be something that's going to be limiting that as well, depending on how they have to make it. But then you've got stuff like the Steam Deck, which is very popular and works really well. That is not a Series S. That's going to be a weaker system that a lot of these games are being redesigned for to run on in different types of PC games. Like, I've never really, like, it's nice being able to build just for one model, but when you can actually scale it a little bit, it kind of becomes less of an issue for a lot of stuff. Like, they'll turn particular features off and things, but it still has a lot of those newer features in there that it can use. Yeah, I'm sure there's going to be some tricks to get it running because of that, but I don't think that's like holding back gaming, especially when there's a lot of titles that they're still being made for PlayStation 4. I mean, hell, Street Fighter 6 was on PS4. It ran really well on a Series S, but vice versa. So, all right. Some of the last stuff we'll go into real quick. Minecraft, they talked about being a significant driver for them because the Microsoft lawyer was asking Stuart about it, saying that Minecraft is one of the most profitable, if not the most profitable IP that we have. And that once again talking about how Xbox is the least of it, with PlayStation being twice the amount that's played on there, with Switch being twice the amount of PlayStation on there. Anyways, so that pretty much finishes up this court case right now. We are still, as of the time of recording, waiting on final judgment of how this is going to go. And then Microsoft still has their CMA court case they have to go through as well over in Europe. And those are the two major holdups they have on this merger going through. And I think I want to ask what you guys think on this. Like, what your opinion, if you think Microsoft has proven that this merger is okay, or is the FTC proven that this is, a different one? Okay, I guess we do have a big question. Damn it. So, Stephen, I'll start with you.
I think, as some people have put it over the past 5 days, with both the redacted emails and dispositions and information accidentally being revealed, I think overall, and I think especially with what both NVIDIA and Phil Spencer have said, I think this is the ball right now is in Microsoft's court to win this. I don't think an injunction will be granted here. I think they will be allowed to kind of go through with it.
Okay. Chris, what are your thoughts on it from what you've heard?
I think it's a complete mess, and
that's the
whatever happens, it really feels like acquisitions have gone too far in general. And I think the FTC should step up their game. But the FTC has just been a complete embarrassment. So I think the ball is in Microsoft's court, but the acquisition shouldn't have been happening in the first place.
Okay. They should have bought Sega. Okay.
I agree. The acquisitions have gotten kind of ridiculous for a lot of this stuff. And I would have said like Bethesda and, that whole merger should have probably been it for a while. The only reason I'm thinking Activision would still be okay for this is because Activision themselves, like, yeah, Call of Duty is really popular, but the company themselves has been having so many problems, legal issues and interpersonal issues and other things happening inside of it. They kind of need someone to come in, babysit them, and clear house to fix a lot of that.
Fresh start.
And yep. I think that hopefully will be something that can occur with Microsoft, which they're trying to do. And hopefully the first thing that goes is Kotick. Just out the door. He may have to be kicked out with that golden parachute, but that's one of those things where it's like, contractually we're going to have to do it, but at least he'll be gone. And maybe they can start fixing and getting stuff going again. And I do hope they can bring back some of the old IPs that got kind of wasted. See if they can actually use this for better stuff.
So, yeah.
Go ahead.
I want to bring you back to a really old quote when it was first announced.
Uh-huh.
That when they were talking to Phil Spencer about this acquisition, he was excited because, as he said, and I can't exactly quote him, but I can kind of paraphrase, is he was not only excited for the capabilities of the current games, he said, because Activision owns Sierra, he said they would love to revisit old games such as, and he specifically mentioned King's Quest. So he said, yes, old Sierra IPs could resurge with the help of Microsoft. And like you said, with those smaller companies, there it is. Like there's something that you could get excited for. some acquisitions suck, but as you said, sometimes a fresh start is what's needed because now these dormant IPs can come out of the woodwork again.
Yeah. And like I said, Chris, I do agree that like the acquisitions need to slow the hell down. But I think this situation could be kind of like, all right, you get this one more, and then we're stopping you. Um,
Again, it just comes down to it being big because we know Sony did a bunch of acquisitions this year and last year. They did at least 3 or 4 so far, and it just wasn't that big. And when you look at all these other like let's go out of video games for a second and you look into stuff like who makes my orange juice? Do they own any other companies? Mondelez,
oh
Procter
yeah,
and Gamble. Do you know how many brands they own? You want to talk about acquisitions getting out of hand? How about you look at those umbrellas? Like those are huge. So I think this is just par for the course, but then this one was such a big bite that it just couldn't be ignored.
it's par for the course, but I don't want to play golf. um, yeah, I'm hoping stuff like that doesn't really happen where too many things are merged together. Like the whole idea of them going after Sega, which Sega did respond saying like, we'll work with them, but we're not merging with them right now. Like the Activision stuff, I think will go through. I I don't think it's going to cause major issues with a lot of stuff, but you've almost got the escalation of it. Like, what will Sony try and do? If they feel they're worried about it, will they try and snatch up something? Will they try and get Square Enix? Will they try and grab
Especially since
Sega?
they know, yeah.
Right
Especially
now,
since they know what Microsoft had on their list, will they retaliate?
and even if they don't get it, I'm wondering what Sony will try and do, because if Microsoft is blocked from doing it, they've successfully had the FTC look at it and say, well, Microsoft's too big for this, but Sony, you're still smaller somehow. They might take advantage of that and try and grab more stuff to grow again, and might be a little more daring in what they get. And that is a concern. I like having smaller companies that are by themselves, like Playground Games. Yeah, they make great, No Man's Sky is amazing. The stuff they make is great. I really don't want them owned by Sony or Microsoft. Like, let them, we got the Switch version because of that. It's got VR on PlayStation, but then I've got all this other cool stuff on Xbox, and my game save can move around. And pretty much if any of the big three owned them, none of that would happen. You don't get
I
that
think
extra little bit of
acquisition should
innovation.
only be saved for companies that are really in trouble. When Sega bought Sammy and, the Atlas thing. If the acquisition can save some companies and properties, fine. If it's just for the sake of keeping, it out of the other guy's hands, then no.
Which I'm kind of curious on that one, Chris. Would you say, with the history of what's been going on with Activision, not financially, but legally, could it fall more into that kind of category of like, you guys can't help yourselves from doing all this crap. We're bringing you in and watching, babysitting you.
I think, well, see, I'm a little biased because I don't play many Activision or Blizzard games,
Okay.
but I feel that they're getting away with not getting the punishment they deserve.
Yeah, no, I'd like to see Kotick in jail. The guy really needs to answer to that. And a lot of the people doing the other stuff. And hopefully Microsoft can go through and clear house with some of that. Like, I don't know if we're going to get jail time or things like
Yeah.
that, but hopefully there'll be
And I think
some
it'd be a
kind of
lot easier
payment.
when he's not in the position he's in,
Right.
which is
Protecting a lot of them.
kind of a positive too if the deal goes through.
Because Phil even stated prior that he believed things needed to be done with that. So he's already in the mindset that these people need to go and these things need to change. So we shall see. But yeah, I think this has been a pretty successful extra quarter talking about a really long court case. It's the first legal focused Zenspath podcast we've had ever. But where can these lovely people come and find us on the internet so they can find out those verdicts once they actually say where they are? So, Stephen, where can we find you at?
You can find me with a Sharpie on Twitter, loading_time. Nothing is redacted, so you'll see what I say.
All right. And Chris, I already know the answer because you have redacted it very successfully every episode. Where can we find you?
You can find me at dot also at and but that's it.
It sounds like his audio disposition has been sealed.
Yeah. My God, he actually said
And
it.
video.
We have evidence. Where's that audio Sharpie? Well played, Chris. All right. Well, I've been your host, Jeremy Powers. You can find me at Zenspath on Twitter, at zenspath.com on Blue Sky, since I've actually been getting into that. You can listen to this podcast over at zenspath.libsyn, libsyn.com, Apple Podcasts, not Stitcher anymore. Apparently they're shutting down. Spotify and other places where you listen to your audio podcasts. And you can watch the video version over at youtube.com/zenspathcom. All right. It's been an extra quarter episode 25, ironically, the quarter episode. And we're out.
Court adjourned.